Two bears near the maple tree. Grandpa Emmett might have been about to die from all the claw marks in his skin where he now bled through his bandages, but Clementine was not the one who did it. It was the other bear, outside the cabin, hidden in the shadows of the night. She listened for the beast's growl as she pushed her long blonde hair behind her ears, but heard nothing. Her bloody fingers left stains along the light strands of hair, let's say her hair, of her hair like dye. The bear out there, who had done this to Clementine's grandpa, could not enter the cabin on account of the bear's choices and the magic power grandpa still possessed. I seem to have started my last two stories with somebody dying, so maybe I'm getting into a rut here. All right. If he died tonight, she didn't know how those rules might change. He coughed up blood onto his whiskered chin, and she knew he could not wait until morning. She was going to have to go for help now. So into the darkness she fled, making sure to close the cabin door firm behind her. It wasn't the thing that was going to protect him from what had injured him so out here, but she wanted the door closed. So she wouldn't have to hear his weak cries of protest telling her not to go. All right, she crossed the dooryard in 3 strides and stuck to the trail winding down the slope in the deeper darkness of nighttime shadows under the full trees. Sticking to the trail proper made her an easier target, but as a little girl running blind through the trees would pose greater dangers. Still, she tripped over the exposed roots as she ran along. Clementine found herself on the edge of overbalancing, let's say. All right, I had a couple misspelled words here that made it a little confusing. All right, but that's what an edit is for. Clementine found herself on the edge of overbalancing forward most of the way. The bear growled. It was the one who had torn into her grandpa. Of course it was. All right, let's put a comma there. Of course it was. No other beast, great or small, would dare to enter this territory as long as such a monster as this still lurked. After it tasted blood, especially Grandpa Emmett's blood, it wasn't going anywhere. The fact that it announced itself on Clementine's trail told her it had no fear of her and might be toying with her before finishing the job it had failed to complete on Grandpa. She hated the beast for what it was and what it had done, for all the good that hate would achieve. She continued her headlong run despite all evidence that this mission might be pointless. She whispered out breathy words between gasps of air. At least I'm leading it away. Small victories were still victories, especially if there were no greater successes to celebrate. She barely registered the sweep of the furry paw and its great dark daggers of claws before the strike lifted her off her feet and launched her to the northwest off the trail and in the air. The monster was closer than she realized. Clementine bounced off a couple trees on her way back to the ground, but far fewer than she expected to strike. The rocks hidden under years of leaves made up for that lucky break as she tumbled across the ground, bruising and cutting herself up. The treetops shook as the great bear forced its way between in passes that should have been too tight. It left dark fur hanging from the rougher patches of bark as it passed. Clementine stood with an effort and turned to face the lumbering monster as it charged her. Ignoring the peril she was in, the charging motion of a bear was almost comical. As if it had gotten fat and was still getting used to moving all that weight. Bears looked more imposing when they were still, she thought. You look ridiculous, she growled at the much larger creature. It stopped within feet of her, staring into her eyes with the dark marbles that made the bear look devilish and without soul. It raised its hind legs and bared its terrible claws. And of course it roared to shake the world. Is that all you got? Clementine taunted. The bear struck her again on its way down to all fours. She lifted in the air and staggered backward, but not nearly as far as before. There was a lot less power in that second strike, but she had already suffered the first, so it added to the pain. Clementine bounced off a... Okay, let's make of into off here, because that is the word. Clementine bounced off a hardwood trunk with no give. As she stumbled forward on the rebound, she saw stars that had nothing to do with the night. Her knees were watery, and there was no telling what might be going on in her jostled brain. But she kept her feet. Let's say on her feet, even though the other is appropriate. I think I used that phrasing too much. She kept on her feet and squared herself before the bear again. "Are you done?" she asked. The bear, with its dead black eyes, stared at her as if it didn't quite know how to proceed. Clementine had just enough time to think bears looked fairly stupid with their dumb black eyes when they stood still looking at you. She had no time to come up with another clever quip before the bear took hold of her again. This time it locked on with its terrible teeth, and she screamed as the points broke her skin. The bear lifted her into the air within its powerful jaws and whipped her from side to side in the fashion wild animals tended to do. After several seconds... pardon me. I have to do some editing in this editing block. After several seconds where everything in the world blurred with the back and forth motion except for the pain, which remained clear and focused, the bear released her in a spin, and she skipped a little farther down the slope and away from the trail. The bear took its time, pacing after her for another go, and that was the first of its grave mistakes that night. Maybe attacking her grandpa was its first fatal error, but no one else was there to decide the matter. Clementine rolled to her stomach as the animal started to charge. She wished she had worn a different dress, because this was one of her favorites, and she'd never get to wear it again. The material tore off her as her body expanded and covered itself in fur darker than that of the bear that had attacked her and Grandpa. Her claws extended black and bloody from her hands, turning into deadly paws. Her teeth grew and sharpened as her jaws shifted into a snout ready to bite and tear. The first bear arrived just in time to see that it now faced a second. Clementine the bear was smaller than this beast, but she attacked from underneath its throat with a vengeance. The bears turned in each other's grasps as Clementine refused to release her teeth from the monster's throat. The first bear tried to twist away. Maybe it would have even retreated, and things might have turned out differently, but that is not how this night played out, and Clementine was in a fury even before she transformed. They slammed each other into trees and peeled the bark away in sheets as they tore into each other. Despite her advantage, Clementine found herself on her back and fighting to get out from under the mass of the larger bear. She squirmed and twisted, kicking up great clouds of dirt and dust in their struggle. All other night creatures had gone silent or fled the scene, leaving the woods for these two creatures to fight over. Let's change creatures to beasts, because I used creatures already in this. So we'll do beasts. These two beasts to fight over. Clementine did get to her feet and was able to square herself once more on even ground. The larger monster held off for a second as a low growl rumbled in the back of its deep throat. Clementine feigned an attack, and the larger creature retreated a step, bracing itself for the resumption of the fight. But then Clementine turned and retreated through the forest in that silly lumbering charge that her kind tended to do. The larger animal growled, possibly at being tricked, and pursued. Clementine was able to squeeze through tighter spaces, but she wasn't that much smaller than her attacker. Let's say that not than her attacker now, because of course she turned into a bear. The other bear stayed close. Clementine reached open ground first and broke into a harder run through the grasses and up the slope. She knew the other bear would close the distance Once it was free, and of the trees as well. And that is what happened as the beast's roars filled the night. A bright red line of setting sun cut the horizon. Let me put a "the" in there. Cut the horizon like a bloody slash, telling Clementine it was not nearly as late as she originally thought. This night had gotten out of her control quite quickly. Well, let's not say night, let's say evening. This evening had gotten out of her control quite quickly. The monster roared again and was closer than Clementine thought. That seemed to be a theme of this terrible day. The last of the light caught the bright red fall leaves of the lone maple tree, standing tall and bright on top of the next hill, where it had been all of Clementine's life. She picked up speed, powered by nothing more than hope, maybe false hope. All right. But to her surprise, she plunged over the line, past where I don't need a "to" there. Past where iron fencing had fallen long ago. She stumbled through gravestones covered in green and white growths. Some faded until they had to be felt in order to be read. Her fur withdrew, her bones reknit themselves, her claws and teeth retracted faster than was comfortable. She had violated this land, and it was forcing her back into a natural form with the power of magic and the universe. Let's say the power of their family's magic and the rules of the universe. All right. Her growls turned into screams of a tortured little girl. Her dress, of course, was gone. The cold bit at her skin, and the untended grasses itched her exposed legs. The bear behind her pulled up short and roared its disapproval from the safe edge. Clementine didn't care if it dared to follow her this time or not. This was going to be over either way. She felt and read her way through the graves of family. There was still ruddy light left in the sky on this exposed hill, and even though she could still read the inscriptions between her and the trunk of the great old maple, she suspected some of that reading came from memory. Mom's grave declared her a loving mother. Dad's said he was a loving husband. Grandma's called her the mother of the whole family, and so on, past the graves of cousin Martin, Uncle Willard, a great Uncle Dole. She never met Uncle Snazzy. She heard stories about her whole life, and the grave of a manservant of her great-grandfather, a fellow named Francis Edler, who earned a spot in this plot. The reason there's an uncle named Snazzy is that Frank Edler came on and dared me to put the word Snazzy somewhere in the story. So that's where it landed. The great-grandparents were buried on the other side of the tree. Clementine set to digging just past the graves of Snazzy and Edler, nearest the base of the tree. Okay. On the other side, let's make this the maple. Nope. This is better. We'll keep that tree, and we'll say near the base of the maple. All right. Then the damn bear did cross. Well, I've not cussed anywhere in this so far. Then that cursed bear did cross the line, and it started to transform as well. Clementine wondered how long it had been since it was anything other than a bear. Probably quite a while. She went on digging until she felt the hard edges of the box. Then she fought to get that free as well. Say free of the graveyard dirt as well. All right. As her claws finally vanished, Clementine's sister held onto the headstones of two modest graves. flexing her fingers as if getting used to having human hands again. Clementine freed the box finally and forced its mud-caked lid open. "Look at me," the girl's voice croaked from lack of use. Let's say the other girls. Clementine stood again to her full height, still inches shorter than her older sister. They both stood naked in their family graveyard. "You think you can beat me by bringing me here? I think Grandpa Emmett needs help because of you, Lucy. That's all I care about. He needs to die so both of us can be free. He can't even turn into a bear anymore. You should have left him alone. He's the last one, Clementine." Lucy held out her hands as if begging, so this needs to be a period. All right. "Once he is gone, we never have to be this again. You don't have to be anything even now. You choose to stalk the woods as a monster all the time. That is your choice." So let me fix that typo. That is your choice. All right, let me emphasize this. Make this italics. That is your choice. That's a better reading. Clementine held her hands clasped behind her back like she had done when she was very little. Lucy dropped her begging hands to her sides. The fingers, let's say Lucy's fingers kept opening and closing like claws. If they did not stand in a cemetery, she probably would still be a bear in her bear form and would be attacking her sister as she had done to Grandpa earlier. "We can never live among normal people, not like this. We've lived a good life up here. This is no life. You need to let me into the cabin to finish this. It's not mine to invite you in, Lucy. Then you drag him out, and this will all be over finally." This will all, let's say, finally be over. I need to put finally in a different place. Finally be over. That is a better configuration of that sentence. Rolls off the tongue better. "I would never, and you are a monster for even asking." Lucy reached out faster than Clementine was ready for. She seized a handful of Clementine's blonde hair that had bits of leaves and stains of Grandpa's blood in it. Clementine had always thought it was funny that her human hair was lighter than Lucy's black hair, but their bear fur was the opposite. Nothing much was funny anymore. Lucy dragged her younger sister toward the edge of the graveyard. "Stop," Clementine cried. Lucy kept dragging her along, bumping her shins into family graves along the way. I got two alongs in there. Kept dragging her. We'll turn that into a comma. Bumping her shins into family graves along the way. "Stop, Lucy." Quiet this time, pleading. "He dies tonight. This is where it all ends. Lucy, just stop." Lucy stepped out from between the outermost stones, and fur erupted around her swelling limbs that still held her sister's hair in the growing claws. Let's turn that to which. I think it reads better. Which held her sister's hair in the growing claws. Clementine brought her hands out from behind her back and pressed the bore of the weapon up into her sister's rib cage as it grew. Let's say as the bones grew. The hammer clicked, and then the boom rolled across the hills like thunder. The silver slug buried itself deep in Lucy's guts. The older sister finally let go. She staggered and fell dead, half in and half out of the family cemetery. She started to revert, but died before she could return fully to one form or the other. It left her distorted and ugly. Clementine dropped the weapon into the grass and fell to her knees, crying. She wept until well after dark. Let's say well after full dark. And last paragraph. Despite everything Lucy, which needs to be capitalized, had done, there would be a burial, but not tonight. there would still be a burial, but not tonight. Grandpa Emmett still needed help, and Clementine needed a new dress. She found her feet, turned her back on her sister, and made her way toward the trail again. All right, there you go.